The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Hebert, Saney's Director of Communications. And I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on using technology for home instruction, medical leave, suspension, and absenteeism. Saney's is proud to present this webinar in cooperation with Castle Learning. As most of you know, Castle Learning is a core resource for supporting K-12 instruction and assessing student learning. Their web-based tools offer benefits to teachers, students, administrators, and parents. So presenting today is Scott Fisher, president of Castle Learning, who leads the Castle team of educational professionals in multiple states, and also Castle's Christy Williams, an experienced educator and professional development specialist in the area of technology integration. So as you may notice looking at your control panel, all participants are muted during the presentation, but we will have time for Q&A at the end. So if you have a question, simply type that into the question box on your control panel, and we'll get to those after the presentation. And we will record the session, and all registrants will receive a link to that recording, which will also be archived on the Saney's website. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott and Christy, and we'll get started.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate everyone taking a little bit of time out of their busy day and their lunch hour to spend some time talking about how we may be able to use technology, especially today's technology, and it's getting more advanced all the time, to address things like home instruction, maybe a student that might be on a medical leave, a suspension, or possibly some absenteeism. And before we actually get started, my colleague, Christy Williams, Christy has a real life experience because she went through one of these in her secondary education process. Christy, you want to share a little bit of your background and what happened prior to technology being available?
I can do that. So hi, everyone, and welcome. So I was chatting with Scott about this webinar concept, and I said, you know, back in the 80s, right, and early 90s, there wasn't a way for us to capitalize on technology. I had an incident where I had to have my knee rebuilt, and I had a morphine drip situation which caused me to be out of school and on medical leave for an extended period of time. And at the time, what we did is use the, teachers or individuals that were really seeking education in the classroom, but were deemed those tutors for the school. And I can recall, bags of books and papers coming home, and everything being transported back and forth, and no electronic delivery, no way of really being able to lend an ear to what happened in the classroom with the teacher. So really, I relied solely on that instructor that was coming to my home. So this is really a way for us to stretch out, think about the tools that we have at our fingertips, and Scott's going to get into some really good concepts. So I'm excited to see the conversation at the tail end of this, and any questions, but yeah, let's get started.
Hey, Christy, thanks for sharing a little bit of a real life experience, and we hear a lot of those as we get out and work with folks in the district of some of these challenges they're dealing with. And we know that, at least what we're hearing from our participating school districts, that these are challenges in trying to keep students on pace and meeting the requirements that you as a district have to meet with those students. And if they're not in the building, that creates a problem. So, and those are a couple of things that we want to try to address in this short webinar today. Some of those challenges, and we realize there's many, but some of them are these three areas as it relates to an example like Christy just had in that medical leave, the suspension, and those students that might not be coming to school and are absent or nowhere to be found. Today's technology, we really believe, provides a lot of flexibility and options, and a lot of this is already at the end of your fingertips, and I know some of this may be somewhat basic, but sometimes I think if we don't think about it, it just kind of goes over the top, and we never get a chance to really think out of the box of how some of that technology might be used today. So one of the things that Christy and I are going to try and focus on is trying to use technology that you probably already have in the district, along with some of the technology that's available outside, let's say through the home, to help keep that student on pace and allow those your districts to meet their academic requirements. We know that a good majority, and it's getting bigger and bigger all the time, that a majority of homes today have some type of web-based access. Now, that could be through their cable provider in a lot of cases, or a wireless service. Could be anywhere from their cell phone provider to some satellite providers that are out there to offer web-based access. So we know this is changing all the time. We're seeing the numbers constantly being reduced to the number of households that don't have internet access. And I was curious when I saw these numbers recently that approaching 90% of the population today has some type of internet access out there. Now, again, where is that? From their phone to, some type of device in the house. That didn't get broken down in this chart, but they do have access and are using it. So it is changing all the time, which is a good thing for, I think, the school and what we're talking about today in that home instruction side. Christy, anything you want to add to that?
Not at this time.
Okay. We want to take a look at a couple of steps as we go through the webinar today. The first step would be to take a look at what web access that student might have outside the school and whereabouts that might be. We realize that when they're in school, in most cases, they do have internet access, whether that be in a one-to-one device or through some type of computer lab, either in the classroom, library, media center, whatever. But what happens once they leave? And we know that a good majority of the students today have access someplace outside of school. If they don't, typically there's a place where they can get it. And I want to talk about a couple of these because there's a couple of things that I've seen recently as we've been out there. If there's not access in the home, and we realize not everybody or every student's going to have access to home, there is places where they know that they can get access other than just the school building. Normally, your public libraries are a good source, possibly for internet access. I'm even seeing here locally, and I live in the Western New York area, there's a lot of churches who have been putting in computer labs to help those families that may not be economically strong enough to afford it. There is a place for those students to go other than in the school building. A relative, it could be grandpa and grandma, it could be an aunt and uncle, that they might be able to go that may have internet access at home. In a medical situation like Christy was talking about, we're even finding that the medical centers today are providing some type of Wi-Fi access for people to get internet. So it's interesting to see that you can walk in there and hop on their Wi-Fi. The Boys and Girls Club, I have one that's not too far from where I live. I know in there they have internet access and a bank of computers for the students to use when they come in. So they're trying to help in that educational process, and even possibly the YMCA, and I'm sure there's others. Christy, anything that you'd like to add to that list?
Yeah, I just had one other concept that came to mind about some of these school districts that participate with families that may not have internet access at home, but they're launching buses out into the community that are transmitting Wi-Fi, so that during homework hours, if you will, those buses are actually available to students so that they can connect with tablets that have been given to them from the school. So there's a lot of ways, I think, we've listed several, and I'm sure, as participants, you could come up with other ideas and other ways that we can actually put, connectivity into the hands of the students, but that's a great list.
Yeah, it's a great point, Christy. I think we just got to kind of think out of the box and what might be out there. And that's, we need to know that for that student that might be outside of school, where do they have access? I think that's kind of step one, to know what they have at the ends of their fingertips for getting that online access. Step two, and what might be one of the more crucial parts of this, if we know the student does have some internet access outside of school, is now we got to determine what resource tool that we're going to use within the school or the district to help provide that instruction to keep that student on pace. And what I want to do is, when we're talking about this whole process of the resource, is I think you need to look internally first, folks. You know, what do we have in our toolbox within the district that we may have already invested in that we can possibly use to help keep that home instruction, that student is on medical leave or suspension or absentee, on pace? Do we have something that can provide multiple facets to it? And I want to talk about that in the step 2. That resource is typically going to have to include multiple components. First of all, the instructional part of this. You know, to be able to provide that instruction that they're missing in the classroom. The second phase of this was we have to provide some type of testing format or assessment that they're going to take based on that instruction. Then it's going to need to provide some type of monitoring or assessment reporting back to the teacher and or administrator. So we have to progress monitor, and then some type of time on task reporting that would allow us to make sure that that student was doing something adequate while they were outside of school. So these are a couple of key components you may want to look at in that resource tool that you're going to possibly use as a way to deliver that home instruction. Christy, anything you want to mention as it relates to these parts of the resource?
Well, I was going to chat a little bit about time on task, but I know we have a slide on that, so I'm going to refrain for now, and then I'm going to jump in when you get to that point.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Okay, so once we start to take a look at that that second part, or step 2, with the resource, I think the first thing that we need to talk about is the instructional part. And how are we going to deliver that to the student? As Christy was mentioning in her real life experience, she was having things delivered to the home or mailed, a tutor coming in. Well, technology today allows us to deliver some of this instruction and using technology, so we don't have to send the tutor over or deliver hard copy via the mail or personal delivery. So think about how the instructional part could be set up for that student that might be in a home instruction type setting. In this case, could it be a video? Maybe that we're recording that teacher's lesson that they're teaching for that week or 2 weeks or month or whatever. Is it audio? Maybe it's something that's going to be recorded where the student could actually listen to it in some type of MP3 or 4 file, for example. Or a document, or a combination. When I say document, think of a PowerPoint, a PDF document with that lesson or skill attached to it. And then we could possibly use any combination of these as a way to deliver that instruction via the technology that the student would have access to. Christy,
Yes.
You want to jump in on that?
I would, thank you. Yeah, I just was thinking, like, some of the tools that can be utilized for really relatively no expense to minimal expense. If you think about the simple recording tools such as Audacity, right? Easy to record an audio file and then take that audio file and pop it into an email for students that they could click on, perhaps, if they are limited to what they actually can do with video, right? Another thing I thought about with that is, have a peer reteaching type of situation where maybe the sick student or whatever the situation might be for the student, have them paired with another peer in the classroom and allow for that peer to do some reteaching themselves, right? So being able to replay. Obviously, you're going to want to tap into those students that are on mark and able to really be able to deliver that to their peer. But that can even be done via phone, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can think outside of how do we actually present this to our students that are absent from the classroom for whatever reason. As for video, I thought for a moment, using smart technology, depending on what board you have and which software, it often captures the pen stroke, the voice, the recording of that lesson, and for a teacher to be able to simply click record and stop recording when they're completed with that, we can compress that video, we can build a channel for the teacher that the student can then tune into and listen and rewatch. There's a lot of ways for us to be able to manipulate that material through delivery. So.
Christy, I think those are great points. I even watched a teacher use his iPad and had it set up recording the class instruction for the day that he was sharing with a student that wasn't going to be in the class that week. So there's a lot of options that are available. Just you got to try a couple things out and see what works best for you and for the teacher. So, but great points, Christy. Something else you might want to consider, and actually we were having a few discussions about this prior to the webinar starting, was the ability to possibly look at a virtual connection. There's a lot of services out there, and some you may have in your classroom already, and some you may want to explore that might allow for a virtual connection directly for that student to the classroom. Kind of that webinar kind of format. So just got to make sure that we've got some type of video camera and a microphone where it would be clear. Christy, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah,
so the whole live virtual session.
Yeah, so I get excited about all this stuff. But yeah, so in my former life, right, so we used to use Tandbergs a lot, a device that was able to connect via video with our classroom of students to someplace else. You know, we would use a zoo, or we would use another classroom in a different part of New York or the States. But taking that technology, another thought I had behind that was, you know what, let's take our class of students. If you have a distance learning lab and it's not occupied for any course credit, you know, with colleges and such, take your students down there and be able to connect with that student, even with where we are with FaceTime and, you know, all these different applications that allow for us to do some video connection. I think there's a lot of ways to think about how can we deliver, how can we be able to involve that student who probably in most cases, especially with medical, they want to be there in the worst way. So that little connection means a lot to some of these kids.
Great point. Thanks, Christy, for the input. The next part of this process after the instruction is we've got to have the student participate in some type of test or assessment to determine if they understood what they got out of the instruction. So that's got to be part of the resource, is providing some type of benchmark, for lack of a better word, that's going to provide the student an opportunity to take that activity right online. The nice thing about technology and doing that is, as the student participates, we're getting some instant feedback back. So, and this is something that could be developed by the teacher. In most cases, it's probably something they're going to use with the classroom as a whole, and they can just issue it right to that student that's on home instruction in the same format they would for the kids that are sitting in the classroom. Christy, would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's such a powerful tool. The details that can be garnered from what is happening with that student, that delivery, to be able to then build out future assignments to support. There's so many ways that can provide additional insight.
And that's some of the things that I think the technology allows us to do without having to worry about sending home, you know, a paper-based activity. So, okay, so we've got the instruction that we've talked about. We've now got a student participating in some type of benchmark or an assessment. From there, we're going to jump over to we're going to get some data back instantly back to that educator, the teacher and or administrator, and to be able to monitor that student's progress from a home-based instruction setting. So in this case, you know, the data is going to play a key role in knowing that we can keep that student on pace, and it's something that we do in our tool, and I'm sure other resources do it. So I think that's something you need to look at when you're actually evaluating the resource for home instruction, is take a look at how that reporting might look. And I used an application that we use within our product just for reference purposes. And if you'll let me grab a pointer here real quick, you know, we want that educator to set some type of mastery level that should be achieved, so we can see that we're going to issue some type of credit for the student's participation. In this case, for my example today, we set 70% as it. Now you can set it at whatever percentage you want. In our reporting, we showed this as a red bar because the score fell below the threshold that we set of 70%. So in this case, the student didn't meet an acceptable level on their initial try, but we can see that as a total. We can also see it broken down by specific content areas, or what we call topics, and any of the standards that were aligned to the questions that were taken in the assessment, along with how that student might have responded to each individual question. Now, it's easy to take a look at this data and say the student fell below an acceptable level. One of the things that we tried to do in our tool was allow us to take a look at both a first attempt and a retry based on some instructional help that student would get even in a home instruction setting. In this case, as the student went through and answered those questions on that first attempt, we were giving them some instructional help on the questions they missed on their first attempt. So questions 1, 4, 6, and 8 were all questions that the student missed on their first attempt. They got some instructional help, and in this case on question 6 and question 8, they were able to answer the questions correctly on their reattempt or a second try, where in this case questions 1 and 4, they missed on both tries. This reporting on the right side of the screen, folks, gives us the retry scores at what we would consider to be full credit. So the student took a jump from 60 to 80% based on the retry. And this may be something you want to take a look at as we talk about student growth, we talk about the learning process, and would we at this point then consider the student meeting an acceptable level? Christy, anything you want to add to that?
I think we're right on the money. Good.
Okay, so, and this, folks, for us is clear data. This is something that I have to go back and get a degree in statistics to figure out. Is pretty cut and dry. Okay, part of this monitoring process is a feature that we've added, and other resources tools may have it also, in talking about time on task. And we were getting a lot of requests for a way to track students that might be in a home instruction setting and allowing that teacher to be able to say how much time was on task, how much idle time did that student have. So this is part of that report for that activity that would allow us to see a breakdown of how much time that student had within that activity. So as this is related, and I'm using this for example purposes, there were 10 questions that the student had to take based on this activity. We know the date and time that they viewed it and the last date and time they viewed it. We'll know in this column right here in the center how many times they viewed it. So in this case, in question number 5, the student actually viewed it 3 times, meaning they were on it, they left it, they came back, they left it again, they came back. The right hand or the blue column is going to tell us exactly how much time was spent on each individual question from the time the student looked at it till the time they answered it. So we know that question number 5 took them a total of 2 minutes and 35 seconds. If I add all of these timetables up, I come up with a total of 7 minutes and 55 seconds. And again, this is a representation based on these 10 questions. However, there was a total of 9 minutes and 15 seconds in the activity, so I potentially had an idle time of 1:60, or 2 minutes, as the case might be. So this can give us some reporting back to that educator of how much time that student may have spent in the activity, how much was on time, on task, how much was idle during that activity, because if the student isn't moving that cursor around, it's starting to track through a number of seconds, and once it gets to 60 seconds, it pops up and asks the student if they want to continue or do they want to exit, and it's tracking those movements of the cursor on the screen or on the computer. Christy, you want to add something to this?
Yeah, so just back to question 5, the viewing of that question 3 times. As an educator, and this is my group of students, and I've been working with them on test-taking strategy. Right now, that says to me, the student took some of those skills that I shared with them, as in, let's use the test to take the test, right? I always teach my students and my educators that I work with how important it is to give skill, to teach skill, that this student can then use this assignment, maybe go on to question 6, bounce back to question 2, because look, 2 had 2 separate views. then go back to question 5 because they felt something in one of those questions may have given away the answer, right? So with a student who may be uncertain as to what the answer might be, I think in looking at this, maybe they use some of those skills we gave them, right? So there's a lot of ways we can use this report and just at a glance to kind of determine, and 2, is a student just clicking through the assignment to get done? This indicates that probably not. The student took the time to answer these 10 questions, but they did struggle with question 5. So there's a lot of ways to look at this and a lot of details can be pulled from it.
Yeah, and I think Christy brings up a good point because if we were live on our site right now by clicking on question number 5, the teacher could actually see not only the question but the properties of that question. So what standard was aligned to our topic. So if that was an area that the student was struggling with, we may be able to give some re-instruction and some additional practice to that specific standard or topic area. Right, Christy?
Good point. Yep.
So I think these 2 reporting mechanisms allow us the data that we're going to need then to be able to track that student in a home instruction activity, be able to know whether that student met an acceptable level if we're going to then possibly issue credit for what they may have missed. So, okay. Just as a couple of side notes, as you're talking about the resources out there, a couple things you may want to think about when you look at the tool that you might use for that home instruction. It might be the activity format that might be available and the way it's delivered and the availability. And one of the things that we've tried to build in as we get these requests from teachers, one thing that we designed in our product was the option for an open or a test mode. The open was the option to get that not only first attempt, but the retry and the instructional help. But there is always an option if we want to truly make it a test with a 1 try only, with no feedback and no retry. And that might be something you want to consider. The second part of this is availability. If we wanted that in a home instruction situation to be worked on within a certain time frame, we can use a from to scenario. When is it going to open? When is it going to close? And is it going to be possibly a timed activity? So the minute it starts, there's a timetable that it starts running and the student needs to finish within that block of time. And if they, by the way, if they leave the session, close the browser, go to another room, the timer is still running. Kind of a unique feature that we've now built in also is this retake option, which is an auto retake function for teachers, which would allow that teacher to allow that home instruction student to have a retake of the questions or the activity that they took in an automatic format so they don't have to keep reassigning it. Christy, anything you want to inject on this?
Just the timed area, if you're thinking about special needs students that really are going to require a quiz and then extended time, so easy to be able to control that right here. Because with the differentiation component with this, you can select that student and say, look, I know based on their IEP 504, they're going to need an extra 30 minutes on this assignment. So you can very easily do that right here.
Great point. Okay, and just as a quick recap, we don't think there's a ton of steps here, but ones you want to do is, as a recap, think about where the student's going to have that internet. If they're on a home instruction type application, where can they get access? Number 2, what resource tool are we going to use as a way to deliver that? And number 3, create a plan of action for that student that's going to be doing some type of academic work outside of school. And with that, Michelle, I'd like to open it up, see if we've got any questions that Christy and I could answer.
Okay, any questions? Just type that into the control panel. I'm not, I think we're good actually. Last call for questions. Okay. Well, like I said, we have recorded this session, and I see Scott just put up Scott and Christy's contact information, so certainly contact with them any questions. You can watch the webinar again and think of any follow-up and send your questions to them at any time. So Scott and Christy, thank you for today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Thanks everybody for attending, and if we can be of any help, feel free to reach out to one of us either through our phone number or email us directly, if you have individual questions, we'd be more than willing to help you out. Thanks, Michelle, for monitoring and running the webinar.
You got it. Okay. Bye-bye.
Have a great day, everybody.